What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, except it's 1 year later. Because if you didn't know, this game launched on, I believe it was February 4th last year, meaning that I'm technically speaking a couple of days behind on this. That said, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was my personal game of the year last year, and it's something I wanted to revisit a little bit in a video, talk about the many updates it got since its release, my own favorite moments, just kind of take a look back at it in general. Because as you would probably guess, with it being my personal game of the year last year, I played it a lot, about 8% of my total play time, which doesn't inherently sound like much, but you have to understand that I play video games more than about 99.9% of the population. But either way, let's go ahead and get on with this. So, for its anniversary, Warhorse Studio put out some stats for the game, just a couple of which that I thought were particularly kind of funny to share, while also announcing a little competition for the game in terms of sharing content for it. I did want to point out that that is not what this video is. I would have to tell you if it was. This is just because I enjoyed the game and wanted to talk about it. That happening at the same time is just a coincidence. But in the year or so since this game launched, we've seen 5.4 million enemies killed by people while drunk, 1.6 billion perfect blocks, 667 million miles of Bohemia traveled, 69.7 million potions brewed, 48.8 million apples consumed, which was a funny one, which makes sense, I guess. They're relatively easy to come by, especially in the early parts of the game. But stats aside, let's talk about the rest of it. So, this game launched in February as easily one of my most anticipated titles after having played the original. Now, the funny thing about the original game is that it's not a game that was on my radar like prior to doing YouTube full time. It had kind of passed me by when it released originally in 2018. My own audience, in fact, quite a few different people suggested the game to me, especially because I had talked here and there about how much I loved games like Oblivion, and eventually, after enough people asking me about it, I decided to jump into it, and I really enjoyed KCD. It wasn't a perfect game by any means, had a lot of rough edges. I didn't love the way they ended the story there on basically just a massive cliffhanger with almost nothing resolved. But long story short, I had a ton of fun with that game. And obviously then the sequel came out, addressed a whole host of some of those rough edges of the original, and while it's still not everybody's cup of tea, it was a vastly improved title in comparison, while also providing the narrative conclusions that I was really looking forward to. But it managed to do all that while still retaining that core that I think in a lot of ways followed up on stuff like Oblivion and really dove deep into the systems that made a game like that so compelling to play and an especially fun sandbox to run around. And while it didn't wind up winning the official Game of the Year, I still think a lot of that stuff shone through, given that it sold and reviewed very well. Now, what followed were several patches alongside 3 DLCs that definitely added and expanded what was already a massive game. This included even free stuff like the addition of Hardcore mode, which came after release. I especially loved Hardcore mode, actually. And we'll get to some of that in a moment, but first I'm going to run through these patches and DLC bits real quick. So, probably unsurprisingly, given basically any big open world RPG, the game was not without its problems upon launch, plenty of bugs, things like that needed fixing, and patch 1.1 was basically all of that stuff, the most immediate crashes and game-breaking problems that people had found. Patch 1.2, which happened roughly in March, about a month or so after the game release, brought us the barber mode, allowing you to, of course, change your hair and the like, while also being an absolutely massive balance pass. Probably have an easier time asking what they didn't balance here. There's just tons of stuff. Pricing, the way crime works, how things were investigated, and that's to say nothing about the massive amount of bug fixes that were in this patch that weren't necessarily like immediately game-breaking problems. But I think more than any of that stuff, really, patch 1.2 is again most notable for just the sheer amount of balancing it did. However, that's actually arguably not even the most important thing that patch brought, because the most important thing, I would say, is more likely the fact that it got official mod support, bringing things to like Steam Workshop as an example. And given the type of game this is, that's obviously a pretty big deal over there, and you can find plenty of mods over on Steam that you can just install exactly that way, but we still have plenty to talk about. So next up in April, actually, about the middle of April, we had Hardcore mode added. Now, I made an entire video about Hardcore and my experiences with it after doing a full run with all of the negative perks, and that video goes into much more detail about what it is, but just for the sake of this particular moment, I will say that Hardcore mode is a much more immersive way to play this game, and while it's already a sort of mode that's not for everybody and a game that's not for everybody, I enjoyed hardcore mode so much and just running through it. In fact, I would say hardcore mode was likely most of my time with this game, probably more than 50% of it, that I wound up using that hardcore all negative perks run for like the rest of the DLC. Either way though, on May 15th we got two things at once. We got patch 1.3 and the game's first DLC, Brushes with Death. Now, patch 1.3 was mostly just more fixes alongside the addition of free horse racing and quests involving that horse racing, which dropped alongside, again, the DLC. Now, Brushes with Death is an interesting DLC in the sense that it's relatively small, and it's more about a story that takes place across the game involving an artist you can choose to help out, and then that has multiple endings based on your decisions. Feature-wise, the big thing added here was shield painting. You could take a shield and have it painted all sorts of different ways, and unlock different, designs and stuff based on the things you have accomplished in-game, with the other portion of that being the quest line involving the artist, simply having like some of the most novel quests. And while it's not a terribly long quest line, it just does have some quests in it that are really fun and engaging if you try to approach them honestly. And so while it wasn't an incredible DLC or anything, I did enjoy it for that specifically. But that does come up as a bit of a theme in this video that you'll probably notice, which is that while the DLC were okay, none of them were really great. And I do kind of think that that kept Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 from really rising to the occasion later on in the year, well past February. Either way though, on September 9th, we got patch 1.4 and the Forge DLC. Now, patch 1.4 was pretty boring. It was pretty much all fixes. That was basically all that patch was, and the big news there was, of course, the Forge DLC. This allowed you to fix up an old forge that you could find in Kutenberg, turning it into a proper little shop. Now, I will say there were some serious bugs with this DLC that prevented it from working properly at first, like things disappearing off of racks, the items you would go to sell in the shop not working correctly, things like that. Now, the thing about this DLC is that it effectively provided you a large player home via this forge to customize and the like, but it was really more of a feature DLC. There was a story and some side quests and things like that associated with it, but by and large it was just expanding upon the crafting that was already in the game and giving you more ways to engage with that and feel immersed in the world, which is great for a particular type of player, but again, it's not the type of DLC that is going to really blow people's minds. Fast forward 2 months, in November 2025 to be specific, we got patch 1.5 and the final DLC, Mysteria Ecclesiae. I would say the best of the 3 DLC for sure, but once again, not exactly groundbreaking in terms of what it did. It has a bunch of fun moments. You find yourself in a monastery trying to get to the bottom of an outbreak of disease that has happened there while also getting involved in some other stuff. It's not exactly super long, but it is a pretty fun and engaging one as far as I'm concerned. Of the 3 DLC, it's the best, at least in my opinion, with the patch that went alongside it, mostly again just fixing random things they found here or making improvements, fixing textures, that kind of usual stuff, which has happened all the way up to this point. So that brings us to the here and the now. So as you probably kind of picked up on over the course of talking about some of those patches and stuff, I would say a criticism that you could level at KCD2 is that the DLC that they released was not exactly, I would say, the type of DLC a lot of people seem to be expecting. And I wouldn't go so far as to say as any of it was bad, like most of it was pretty good in the way that it was intended to be out there, but there was no like big expansion sized DLC that really added tons of content or changed things up. Like we never got like an entirely big new open zone to explore, new things to get involved in, that kind of stuff. They were all definitely on the smaller side, typically like one single quest line with some extra stuff, things like that. And while that's not the end of the world, it did mostly, I would say, at least me in particular, leave me wanting more, which is interesting to say about the game that I played the most last year. It was kind of like leaving a meal that just didn't quite hit the spot, but you're also full. And unfortunately, that rather amorphous and ambiguous thing to describe is what I ultimately think cost Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 the actual game of the year last year. Combined with the fact that the base game released all the way back in February, it just didn't, via those DLC releases, I think, have the staying power to stay at the forefront of people's minds, especially with the way voting and everything is done there. And yet, less filling than I would have preferred DLC aside, I can't help but be blown away with basically everything else about this game. Just the sheer immersion of it, running around, exploring, finding things, enjoying the environmental storytelling of it all, the actual quest, the systemic approach to the way the open world works. That stuff is where this game shines, and if it clicks with you, it's just an incredible experience, and I really did love it. Hardcore mode especially, I just had such a blast with that specific mode, even with all negative perks turned on. If anything, I think while it certainly takes much longer to play, and I can see why they didn't want to make that the literal base game experience, that is literally my preferred way to play. Admittedly though, only after having played through the game the normal way previously. But I really do think this game is something special from those moments where either Red Herring or Pebbles, whichever horse you happen to go with, has been with you long enough and they suddenly get amazing stats from, literally bonding with Henry, and the way that was depicted via game mechanics is actually really touching. Little moments, via all the characters you're meeting, how things wind up, Catherine especially, or how things play out at the wedding, etc., etc. There's just so many moments about this game that I loved and had so much fun with, and I'm glad that, for as massive as it is, it will still be available for people to check out in the future, and hopefully spend an excessive amount of time with, just the way I did. Now, looking to the future, I am especially interested in what Warhorse Studios does next. While only they really know that for sure, I think it's possible they would continue the Kingdom Come Deliverance series, but I do feel like Henry's story is probably done. I think that narrative arc has probably reached its conclusion. I feel like they would go a different direction even if they continued with this series, which I don't think is guaranteed by any means. But regardless, Warhorse has made 2 games that I really just had a ton of fun with. And for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 specifically, I think there are worse things a game can do than leave you wanting to play more of it. So in the year since this game's initial launch, I think it has improved dramatically, and while I wish the DLC had been a little bit more ambitious, that's simply because I loved the game and wanted more of it. And I think that is just about everything I've got to say on this one. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. With that in mind, I'd be happy to hear what you think about this particular game down in the comment sections below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.